Welcome to Deep Crime Files, where every mystery has a story. On a warm June night in 2002, a 14-year-old girl woke to find a stranger standing over her bed with a knife, and what happened next would become one of the most closely watched missing persons cases in American history. This is the true crime story of Elizabeth Smart. Watch till the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Elizabeth Smart was a bright, accomplished teenager living in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, Utah, a community nestled in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains where residents rarely locked their doors and children played freely in tree-lined streets. She was the second of 6 children in a close-knit Mormon family, known for her musical talent with the harp and her dedication to her church and community. On the night of June 4, 2002, Elizabeth went to bed in the bedroom she shared with her 9-year-old sister Mary Catherine, in the family's comfortable home on Christiana Circle, with no reason to believe that anything unusual would happen before morning. Shortly after midnight in the early hours of June 5, a man entered the Smart home through an unlocked kitchen window, made his way upstairs past the sleeping parents and other children, and entered the girl's bedroom where he approached Elizabeth's bed with a knife, waking her by holding the blade close to her throat and threatening to harm her and her family if she made any noise or resisted. The intruder, later identified as Brian David Mitchell, forced the terrified teenager to put on shoes and a robe, then led her out of the house and up into the foothills behind the neighborhood while Mary Catherine, frozen with fear in the darkness, remained silent in her bed, too frightened to immediately wake her parents. When Mary Catherine finally found the courage to go to her parents' room and tell them what she had witnessed, Ed and Lois Smart rushed to their daughter's empty bed and immediately called police, beginning what would become one of the most intensive missing child investigations in Utah's history. The initial police response was swift and massive, with hundreds of officers, FBI agents, and volunteers searching the mountainous terrain surrounding the Smart home, going door to door, checking abandoned buildings, and following up on countless tips that poured in from across the country as media coverage of the blonde, photogenic teenager's disappearance dominated national headlines. The Smart family, particularly Elizabeth's father Ed and her uncle Tom Smart, became tireless advocates for their daughter's safe return, holding press conferences, organizing search parties, and keeping Elizabeth's face in the public eye with a determination that never wavered even as days turned into weeks and then months with no concrete leads. The case attracted the attention of massive volunteer search efforts, with thousands of people combing through canyons, searching dumpsters, and posting flyers throughout Utah and neighboring states, while the FBI worked multiple theories about what might have happened to the girl who had simply vanished from her bed. What investigators and the public didn't know was that Elizabeth was being held captive just a few miles away from her home, hidden in a crude campsite in the foothills where Mitchell, a self-proclaimed prophet who called himself Emmanuel, and his wife Wanda Barzee, kept the teenager in what they claimed was a religious plural marriage, subjecting her to repeated sexual assaults, forcing her to wear robes and a veil that covered her face, and using a combination of physical threats, religious manipulation, and psychological control to prevent her from escaping or calling out for help. Mitchell had actually worked briefly at the Smart home months earlier, hired for a few hours of handyman work, though he had called himself Emmanuel during that encounter and his appearance had been different enough that the connection wasn't immediately made by investigators or by Mary Catherine, who had only caught a glimpse of him in the darkness of that June night. Throughout the summer and fall of 2002, Mitchell moved Elizabeth between various campsites in the mountains, keeping her tethered with a cable at times, controlling her through threats against her family, and indoctrinating her with his distorted religious beliefs while Barzee, who was completely devoted to Mitchell, assisted in the captivity and abuse. Elizabeth later described how she was forced to endure daily rapes, was given little food or water, and lived in constant fear for her life and the safety of her family, while also experiencing the profound psychological manipulation that made her believe that even if she had the opportunity to escape, she would be blamed, rejected, or that her family would be harmed. Mitchell occasionally brought Elizabeth closer to civilization, even into Salt Lake City itself, though she was kept veiled, and he warned her that any attempt to identify herself would result in violence against her or her family, and the combination of trauma, shame, and fear kept her silent even when they encountered police officers or other people who might have been able to help. As months passed with no breaks in the case, some investigators began to privately believe that Elizabeth might not be found alive, though her family refused to give up hope and continued their public campaign for information. The turning point came in October 2002, 4 months after the abduction, when Mary Catherine, who had been working with investigators and gradually recovering memories from that traumatic night, suddenly remembered where she had seen the intruder before, recognizing him as the man who had called himself Emmanuel and had done odd jobs at their house, and this crucial detail gave investigators a new lead to pursue. Police began searching for Emmanuel, eventually identifying him as Brian David Mitchell, a drifter with a history of mental health issues and religious delusions who had been excommunicated from the Mormon Church, and was known in Salt Lake City's homeless community as a strange figure who preached on street corners about his divine calling. In November 2002, Mitchell made the risky decision to move Elizabeth to San Diego, California, taking her and Barzee across state lines where they lived on the streets and in shelters, with Elizabeth still veiled and silent while they panhandled, and Mitchell continued to assault her in various locations around the city. When the San Diego climate became uncomfortable during the winter, Mitchell decided to return to Utah, and by March 2003, nearly 9 months after the abduction, the trio was back in the Salt Lake City area, moving between Sandy, a suburb south of Salt Lake City, where they were spotted by multiple people who thought the veiled girl seemed out of place but didn't immediately make the connection to the missing teenager, whose face had been on the news for months. The case finally broke on March 12, 2003, when several people in Sandy, Utah called police to report a suspicious group matching the descriptions that had been widely circulated after Mitchell's identification as a suspect, with particular attention drawn to the young girl wearing a veil and gray wig who was being kept close to an older man and woman. Police officers responded and approached the group on a street in Sandy, where they questioned Mitchell, who initially gave false names for himself, Barzee, and the girl he claimed was his daughter. The officers, however, were persistent and separated Elizabeth from her captors, and when they asked her to lift her veil and state her name, she initially said she was Augustine Marshall, but under continued gentle questioning and when asked directly if she was Elizabeth Smart, the teenager who had endured 9 months of captivity, abuse, and terror finally acknowledged her true identity, speaking the words that would end her ordeal and reunite her with the family who had never stopped searching. The immediate aftermath of Elizabeth's rescue brought overwhelming media attention and an outpouring of public relief, while also launching the complex legal process of holding her captors accountable for their crimes. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee were arrested and charged with multiple federal and state crimes including kidnapping and sexual assault, but the path to justice would prove lengthy and complicated. Mitchell's defense attorneys argued that he was mentally incompetent to stand trial, claiming that his religious delusions and mental illness prevented him from understanding the proceedings or assisting in his own defense, and this legal strategy resulted in years of delays, psychiatric evaluations, and court hearings to determine his competency. Wanda Barzee, who cooperated more fully with authorities and expressed some remorse for her role in Elizabeth's captivity, eventually pleaded guilty in both federal and state courts to charges of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor, receiving sentences that would ultimately total 15 years in federal prison. Mitchell's case moved more slowly through the legal system, with a federal judge finally ruling in 2010, 7 years after Elizabeth's rescue, that he was competent to stand trial despite his continued bizarre behavior in court, including singing hymns and making religious proclamations. The federal trial took place in Salt Lake City in late 2010, where Elizabeth, then a young adult, bravely testified in detail about the abuse she endured during her 9 months in captivity, describing the sexual assaults, the psychological manipulation, the fear and degradation she experienced, and the strength it took to survive while maintaining hope that she might one day return to her family. The jury deliberated for approximately 5 hours before finding Mitchell guilty on all counts, including kidnapping and transporting a minor across state lines for sexual purposes, and in May 2011, he was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The state of Utah chose not to pursue additional charges once the federal life sentence was secured, ensuring that Mitchell would never be released from custody regardless of any changes in federal law or policy. Elizabeth Smart's survival and rescue had a profound impact far beyond her own family, influencing how law enforcement and the public understand child abduction cases, the psychology of captivity, and the resilience of survivors. In the years following her rescue, Elizabeth made the courageous decision to become a public advocate for child safety, victims' rights, and missing persons cases, using her experience to educate others while completing her education, getting married, and building a life that defied the trauma she endured. She has spoken openly about the psychological aspects of her captivity, including the shame and fear that prevented her from escaping, even when opportunities might have existed, helping other survivors understand that their reactions to trauma are not weaknesses but survival mechanisms. The case led to improvements in the Amber Alert system and renewed attention to the importance of following up on all leads in missing children cases, no matter how unlikely they might seem. Elizabeth's advocacy work has included testifying before Congress about legislation to protect children, working with organizations dedicated to preventing child sexual exploitation, and writing a memoir that detailed her experience with the goal of helping other survivors and educating the public about the realities of abduction and captivity. Wanda Barzee was released from federal prison in 2018 after serving her sentence, a decision that generated controversy and concern from the Smart family and the public, though she remains under lifetime supervised release with strict conditions. Brian David Mitchell remains incarcerated in federal prison, where he will stay for the remainder of his life, while Elizabeth Smart has continued to build a public profile as an advocate, author, and speaker, refusing to let the worst 9 months of her life define her future or silence her voice in working to protect other children from predators. The Elizabeth Smart case remains one of the most well-known child abduction cases in American history, not only because of the intensive media coverage and miraculous rescue, but because of Elizabeth's extraordinary courage both during her captivity and in the years since, as she has transformed her survival into purposeful advocacy that has helped countless others while demonstrating that healing and normalcy are possible even after unimaginable trauma. What aspects of this case do you find most significant, and how do you think Elizabeth's advocacy has changed the conversation about child safety and survivor trauma? If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more carefully researched true crime documentaries. We'd love to hear your respectful thoughts in the comments below.